Hello and welcome. Today we're going to see if it really is impossible to polish a turd, and by that I mean, can we restore the scratched up paint of my E34? I've polished this car in the first episode on this series and the results were okay-ish, but it still has a lot of deep scratches. Like these, some extremely scratched up door handles, and an actual trunk that has more scratches than paint. And to prove a point, we're gonna go from this to this. That's quite a drastic change. To do this, we're gonna use sandpaper, 3 and 10,000 grit respectively, some clear coat, and a tiny needle. Every YouTube video about removing clear coat scratches is always just sand it down and then you polish it. I don't want to do that because this car is approaching 30 years old and by that it deserves to be preserved. Talking about preserving this car, that's why I also start with 3000 grit and then go to 10,000 grit instead of 1500, 3000, 5000 like most people do. Keep in mind that the scratches are a lot more visible in real life than on the camera, but I'm just gonna show you guys anyways. I've given the car a thorough wash in advance so that we can waste no time in this video. You shouldn't be using brake clean on paint, but since I really want the new paint to stick inside of the scratch, I'm just gonna go over it a tiny bit because otherwise the result is gonna look really bad. Just a tiny bit. Everybody can do this. I've just done paint correction once or twice in the past and the results have been really nice every single time. Just make sure to not rush anything. Saying that, I do not recommend that you do this if you're impatient because there's going to be a lot of time involved. And by a lot, I mean all of it. Just the one half of the trunk took me 4 hours. It really takes a long time. Now you can get comfortable in your chair while I do the walk, grab a drink because this is going to be a long time lapse. You can also use the included brush that most clear coat sellers provide. Works a bit easier, but you have to apply more pressure on the squeegee. Also, try eliminating working on edges, because if you sand over the edge, you're going to burn through the clear coat in a matter of a few strokes, so really try to avoid that. I just passed it with the squeegee because I pressed down too hard, but I managed to remove most of it with a towel I have on hand. So also, if you don't trust this method, just wait because the result speaks for itself. After we filled up the clear coat yesterday, I've let it dry and today I started sanding down the whole car. I already did like a quarter of the bonnet, but unfortunately the camera wasn't rolling. There's still this huge dent which we're gonna do with PDR, just like this dent and all the other various dents that this car has. But the PDR process is for another episode. This is already very time consuming and I don't want to stretch a video over 50 minutes. As you can see, this is the line where we filled up the huge scratch and this as well. Unfortunately, I didn't notice that this scratch actually went through the clear coat. So now we have a bit of primer visible. That's a bit unfortunate, but now it's too late to fill it up with base coat and then clear coat after. So we'll just proceed with this as if it didn't happen. But unfortunately, this scratch will still be visible, although it will be greatly improved. To wet sand the whole thing, I'm just going to use water and dish detergent. And I'm going to start with 3000 grit sandpaper. Wet up the paper as well. And then most people go in like these weird sideways this direction, sideways that direction strokes, but I prefer just going in circle motions in like a square so that I always know what I'm doing. and in my opinion I think going in circles leaves less deep scratches to go over with the 10,000 grit afterwards. Don't apply any pressure because you don't want to burn through the clear coat, because that would be bad news. And now you can really see where we filled the scratches up. This is the part that's not yet completely scratched. And now we got to flatten that to the height of the actual paint where all the other scratches are still in there. And to flatten that down, I no longer wet sand it completely, I just keep the sandpaper a bit damp and then I go over it with one thumb while looking at it sideways to really see what I'm doing. And then I go over it with a completely dry towel so that it quickly dries off and I can see where I still have some work to do. This I like to do just with one finger and no pressure. If you have one of these really flat sanding blocks, that's even better. As you can see, I'm just going over it, wiping off the moisture, and then I can clearly see where there's still highs. And on the highs you have to grind them down even more until they're flat with the rest of the paint, because otherwise you're gonna have like these bumpy things in your final result, which you don't really want. As you can see, the high spots in this section are now fully removed, and this is now almost ready for polishing. I'm gonna do the whole side of this hood and then pass it with 10,000 grit to get out the deeper 3,000 grit scratches, and then we can compound and polish. If we now look more closely, we can see that the 10,000 grit scratches are a lot more refined and give a more regular haze compared to the 3,000 grit scratches, and this is like really smooth, and just visibly I would say that this will buff out to a really nice, almost perfect finish. In some places you can still see some orange peel. So we went really like aggressive with the paint. That's why I've decided to go with 3 and 10,000 grit instead of going with a more like aggressive sandpaper as most people would do. This takes a bit more time, but honestly I would rather preserve the paint and have a not so good result than take off 5-10 years of the paint's life and just have a near perfect result for 2 years and then the paint's dead and needs a respray. Now the whole car has this really regular haze to it, and now we're ready for the buffing process. This is gonna leave a really nice before and after. And this is now our paint job after a bit of cutting. I'm gonna have to do more cutting with the microfiber pad than I anticipated, but the result is silky smooth even before the polishing step. In case you didn't notice, there's multiple steps involved after the wet sanding. Usually you cut with a microfiber pad and an aggressive compound, and then you polish it with a less aggressive compound and a less aggressive pad. I'm gonna do the polishing with a foam pad, and yeah, this is already cut once, but there's still a lot of haze and like very light scratches. This is cut 2 or 3 times and it is really okay-ish. When it comes to paint, I'm a bit of a perfectionist and this is not as good as I anticipated, but I guess I'll live with it. And yeah, up on top I still have to do the cutting, so I'll do 1 more cutting pass here and 2 more cutting passes here and then the polish. Quick little update, I just finished cutting this side and this side is clean but untreated. So the difference is really visible, like it is honestly really great. Also, the shine of the paint will still greatly improve after the polishing stage. We're just done with the cutting stage. So the haze is now completely gone all over, and yeah, the result is okay-ish. Well, on camera it looks pretty much perfect, but in reality I can still see a tiny bit. Also, the car still has a little bit of its original orange peel, so we were really not aggressive with the sandpaper, and that's always good to know. All of the scratches are completely gone. The ones we filled were some really deep scratches, and now it is some really tiny ones. The camera doesn't pick up said scratches, but with my eyes I can see them. But yeah, this result is really okay for this car. Now I'm gonna do the polishing stage with a foam pad. That's just gonna take less time than the previous step because there's less imperfections to take out, but I'm still gonna do it really thoroughly, and then we can finally remove the stripe to check the two-step comparison. I cleaned both sides and removed all polish residue from both sides, and even on the camera you can see a clear and visible difference in the deepness and the shine of the paint. This side looked okay when this side wasn't done yet, but now that I have both sides for comparison, the difference is quite astonishing. The difference is really something else. The camera really doesn't do it justice. In real life it looks a million times better. Also, this was still the conservative step because I didn't go all out with the sanding paper, and we managed to take out like 90-ish, 95%-ish of all the defects. This is a proper paint restoration, and definitely the E34 was worthy of that. And now I'm gonna do the whole second side in one go. I'm gonna take a wax coating instead of a ceramic coating because usually I prefer ceramic coatings instead of wax coatings, but in this case, even with the sanding and the aggressive polishing, I didn't really get out everything. It looks a million times better than before, but the really deep scratches are now hardly visible, and I don't want them visible at all. So I'm gonna take a bit of wax in the hopes that this fills it up a tiny bit more and makes it look that tiny 1% better. I hope it isn't too bright outside, but the difference is really something else in reality, because all the really deep scratches are no longer completely visible. Most of them have gotten out completely, most of them have disappeared like 90-ish%. I don't know if you can see some streaks still, but the streaks, that's from the wax coating. That's also another reason why I dislike wax coatings, because these always leave streaks no matter how much you go over it with the towel to remove it. So I just prefer ceramic, and that's just my opinion, but whatever. And now I want to know, would you guys do the same because of how time intense this is? Just the hood took me around 8 hours, which is really a lot of work. But yeah, I think the result is actually okay-ish. It's not as perfect as I expected it to be, but old paint was really hard. Like, the paint on this car is really hard, really difficult to polish and to sand out. And next time I'm gonna do something like this, I'm definitely gonna start with 1500 grit, because 3000 was already like way too fine. And yeah, the paint is extremely smooth. I can just glide over it with my hands. Now that the hood is done, I just have to do it with all the other places, so this might take a while.